So Joanna, you and I have got a job to do today. We are going to try and explain a little bit more about the gender pay gap. So from a UKSI perspective, obviously we've been reporting about this for probably the last 5 or 6 years, and we have to do that from a legal perspective. But it's really only the last couple of years that we've started to properly understand what we need to do. It's very easy for people to say, you've got a gender pay gap, why don't you just solve it? But obviously what we've learned through working with you and your team, and you specifically in the last 6 months, is where we really need to take action. And we're pleased that we've come down over the last few years, particularly in the last year. But what would be really good to understand is the work that you do to help us understand what the information is really telling us. So I wonder if you might just tell us a bit about that.
Of course. I think I'll quickly just run over how it's measured, how it's calculated. So it's the male hourly pay, take away the female hourly pay, divided by the male hourly pay, times by 100. So that is the gender pay gap. As you mentioned, it has decreased this year. So it's decreased to 10.8% in favour of men. So that simply means there is still a gender pay gap in favour of men. So which means male earnings on average are higher than female earnings. The decrease might sound positive, and it is positive, of course it is. However, there is still a gender pay gap. It's still 10.8%. Men are still on average earning more than women. So equal pay is not the same as gender pay gap. Equal pay is when the male and women, they're earning the exact same for the exact same role. So we do have equal pay at UKSI, great. However, we do have an unequal gender pay gap, which is what we're focusing on today.
What is the findings telling us about the main things or facts behind the actual gender pay gap? Do we kind of know what's causing it at the moment?
We do. It is the highest quartile. So in UKSI, the way we kind of measure gender pay gap, one way we look at it is into quartiles. So we take the entire business, we split them into 4 equal parts. So with pay quartiles, let's imagine there's 100 people in the organisation. We line them up from lowest pay to highest pay, and then we split the people by equal amounts. So it'd be 25, 25, 25, 25. And when we say the lowest pay quartile, it's looking at just the 25 people in this lowest pay quartile. When we say highest pay quartile, we mean the top 25. And then the middle, we've got lower middle and then upper middle. So essentially it's splitting the organisation into 4 pay quartiles based on overall pay. And we know there are the biggest disparities in this highest quartile. So in the highest quarter of people at UKSI, we know there are less women in this quartile. We know that the women that are there are still earning slightly lower than the highest men in this quartile. So the issue or the main driver of the unequal pay gap is this highest pay quartile. And one way we can solve this is to get more women into this quartile.
Okay. And just to be clear, this is on hourly pay. So
On
it's nothing,
hourly
it's
pay.
nothing to do with part-time versus full-time. It's on hourly pay, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, so this is just the overall gender pay
Yeah.
gap based on hourly pay. We did do some analysis into part-time pay gap as well in UKSI, and there were some disparities there. We know that on average women we know that women are more likely to be in part-time positions, so this was something that I know you, Jackie, really want to look into.
Yeah.
On average, there are more women in part-time positions at UKSI, and they do earn less than part-time men. They also earn less than full-time men. So there is this real point that I think as a business we can really look into part-time women. But the main overall picture, that's just looking at hourly pay and doesn't take into consideration part-time or full-time.
Okay, so in summary, before we get into what we're trying to do about it, the 2 things that we can probably say is we know we've got less women in higher paid roles, and if we did one thing only, and clearly there's many things we could do, that's the biggest thing that would probably make a difference.
I'm sure many people will be wondering how it's gone down. So from last year to this year, we saw changes in this lowest quartile. In the past, we've seen that more women are in the lower pay quartile. However, in the past year, we've had more men come into this quartile and less women. So there has been changes in the proportion of women in this lowest pay quartile. So there's been changes in the lower end, but unfortunately not at the upper end, which is what I mentioned is where changes can be done.
Great, that's brilliant news, I think. Just remind me, where do we sit in the context of the national average out there?
We're doing better. We are doing
good news.
better. So I believe the national average is around 14-15%.
Okay.
So we are under that now with 10.8%. So there is some good news there. So Jackie, we've had this report, we've got this data. What are SLT going to do?
So SLT have now got this firmly on their radar, and we want to be really targeted about what we do. We want to target specifically opportunities to support women within and outside the UKSI to develop into those senior roles. We are confident this is not a capability issue, this is about a support issue, about people understanding the opportunity. So we're doing some specific work to support female leaders or potential leaders in the organisation. And then secondly, we want to do more to support our male population to take advantage of some of the things potentially that females take more advantage of in our organisation. We want this to be not just female focused, we want it to be about the whole organisation being inclusive, men and women being allies for each other. So that would be what we want to try to achieve this year.
So if we were doing this report in a year's time,
Yeah.
what would you hope the outcomes of the report would be?
So ideally, of course, I'd be sitting here saying we would have no gender pay
Yeah,
gap.
that'd be nice.
I think that's a bit
Yeah.
unrealistic given the strides we've got to make. So what I would want to see, I'd want to see positive trajectory, and actually I want to hear a narrative in the organisation that's saying we are now feeling like, you know, we understand this and we're moving in the right direction, and there are opportunities for us to develop men and female equally across the organisation. That's where I'd like us to be.
Brilliant.
Joanna, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for all your work on this and for helping us to explain it today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.